Welcome to Strange Truths and Tall Tales, the product of Newfoundland podcast. I'm Robert, your guide through the timeless, tangly, and totally true-ish stories of Newfoundland. Tonight, we're going creepy. It's Halloween, and I've got a ghost story that I want to share. It's the tale of a real historical event, one that went on to inspire an eerie legend and even a traditional song. So settle in, listen close, and come aboard the Charles Haskell, a schooner that's been giving sailors the shivers for generations.
You're traveling through the fog, and just ahead is an island of mystery, mayhem, and myth. Your next stop, Newfoundland, and these are its strange truths and tall tales.
The Charles Haskell was a New England fishing schooner built to survive the unforgiving waters of the North Atlantic. Despite her solid construction, her fishing career was short-lived. They say she ended her days hauling cargo in Nova Scotia, but no one really talks about that much. The Charles Haskell is remembered for something else entirely, a deadly accident, a story of drowned men that wouldn't stay dead. They say the Haskell is perhaps the most haunted ship to ever sail the North Atlantic. And it all began with a storm. It was March 6, 1869. The Charles Haskell, under the command of Captain Clifford Curtis, was fishing George's Bank alongside more than 100 other schooners when the weather turned. What began as a rough sea quickly descended into the kind of storm few had ever seen. By 11 p.m., the wind was howling, tearing across the deck. Hail and snow came sideways, stinging the faces of the crew. The captain, a seasoned mariner, knew things were about to get dangerous. He ordered everything on deck secured. 2 men were set on watch, one with an axe in hand, ready to cut the anchor if another vessel came too close. It wasn't paranoia, it was foresight. The lights of oil lamps from other ships danced in the storm as waves tossed schooners high and low. Soon, what everyone feared came to pass. Schooners all around broke free of their moorings, their anchors no match for the wind and sea. At the will of the storm, ships careened through the darkness. Suddenly, a vessel riding high on a wave was bearing down on the Haskell. In seconds, it would be thrown on top of them. Just as the captain had instructed, the watchman slammed his axe against the anchor ropes. The Haskell, freed from her mooring, was tossed out of the path of the oncoming ship. They had escaped collision, but now there was a new problem. The Haskell herself was adrift. Captain Curtis lashed himself to the wheel, fighting to control the ship through the chaos of the storm. It was nearly impossible. The sea was too strong and the storm was blinding. The crew took up watch, scanning the night for the dozens of other schooners around them. When the warning came, there was little they could do. Another ship, the Andrew Jackson, was dead ahead. No matter how the captain pulled at the wheel, he couldn't change the course. The Haskell was being steered by the storm. A tremendous swell lifted her, holding her high on the crest of a wave. The Andrew Jackson dipped and rolled into the trough below. The crew could see what was about to happen. The Haskell was going to come down on top of the Jackson. Then, as if in slow motion, it happened. The entire weight of the Haskell slammed into the Jackson, her keel ripping through the deck. Wooden planks twisted and tore, beams snapped, and water poured below deck. The Jackson was mortally wounded, but somehow, the Haskell had survived. The momentum of the wave carried them free of the wreck. The crew of the Haskell stared in horror as the Jackson capsized in front of them. They watched as the desperate crew climbed onto the sinking hull, trying and failing to hold on against the power of the storm. In seconds, they were gone, all of them, washed away. On the Haskell, the damage was severe. Her bowsprit, jib, and mainsail were wrecked. The deck was stripped clean, her dories gone. But somehow they managed to stay afloat. Somehow they'd survived. When the sun rose, it revealed a devastating scene. The Haskell was battered, but that was the least of it. The crew were shaken. Their ship, the one that had saved them, had drowned the men of the Andrew Jackson. It had been a horrible accident. They knew there was nothing they could have done, but the guilt weighed heavily. The fishing trip was over. The boat needed repairs, and the crew were in no condition to stay on the banks. They were changed men. The Haskell limped to port. Some say to St. John's, others say New England. Regardless, she was patched up, and by the next spring, she was back on the banks. And that's when tragedy turned into terror. Roughly a week into the voyage, the Charles Haskell was at anchor, not far from where the Andrew Jackson had gone down. But this night was different. The sea was eerily calm. The watchman leaned on the rail, listening to the slow creak of the rigging and the gentle lap of the water against the hull. Then, something moved in the water. At first, he thought it was a fish, but when he raised his glass to his eye, what he saw froze him where he stood. The Haskell was surrounded by men. Dead men. Decaying bodies rising from the deep, their heads breaking the surface, pale skin glowing in the moonlight. One by one, 24 corpses fixed their cloudy eyes on the Haskell. Then, as though treading water, they began to move toward the vessel. 3 times the watchman tried to call out before any sound escaped his throat. By the time the crew reached the deck, the dead men were nearly at the boat. Then came the noise, a slow, wet scrape, bone on wood. The dead men were climbing aboard. One by one, they hauled themselves over the rail, covered in torn oilskins and seaweed, water pouring from their bodies. And whatever they were now, it was clear they had once been Banks fishermen. In death, they hadn't forgotten their trade. They took their positions, baiting hooks, setting lines, hauling invisible fish from the sea. The living crew huddled together, terrified, watching the ghostly fishermen work through the night. Just before dawn, the phantoms finished their labor, then slipped silently back into the waves. In the morning, no one spoke of it, but every man was thinking the same thing. Of the Andrew Jackson and the men they'd drowned. Had those souls returned to finish the voyage the Haskell had cut short? That night, the ghost came again, and again they fished, and again they vanished at dawn, walking away across the waves like men bound for shore. The crew had seen enough. They raised anchor and left the Banks that very hour. From that day on, no crew would sign aboard the Charles Haskell. James Gillespie of Fortune Harbor later said, "They hove the sails off her and let her rot at the wharf in St. John's Harbor because they never could get a crew to sign on her." She was eventually sold off and spent her final days as a cargo ship, but the stories of her ghostly fishermen lived on. In December 1920, the last surviving member of the Haskell's crew, John Winters, died at the age of 82. They say he told the story of the haunting almost to the last. The legend spread far and wide. It inspired a folk song, The Ghostly Sailors, and its variants were sung from New England to Newfoundland. Elizabeth Greenleaf collected a version here on the island and published it as Spirit Song of George's Bay. McEdward Leach recorded others under the title The Ghostly Fisherman. You can still listen to those recordings today. They're online. Check them out. I'll put links on the episode page. So, how much of this story is true? Well, newspapers of the day confirmed that a schooner called the Charles Haskell collided with another vessel on George's Bay in March 1869. And by 1892, a ship by that same name was still sailing from Digby, Nova Scotia, under new ownership. The rest? Well, that's harder to prove. Some say she spent time in St. John's, others say she never did. As for the ghostly fisherman, well, that's for you to decide. And that is the story of the Charles Haskell, the schooner that couldn't quite leave her ghosts behind. Might make you think twice about sailing after dark. If you want to dive deeper into this story and a few others that'll keep you off at night, you can find photos, sources, and more over on productofnewfoundland.ca. And you can follow along on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And keep your ears open because I've got plenty more Halloween tales coming your way. Until next time, keep the lantern lit and maybe keep an eye out for ghostly sailors. I mean, if they could haunt the Charles Haskell, they could be anywhere.